Around 10:15 Friday morning, I interviewed Jonathan Williams, the president and chief economist of the American Legislative Exchange Council, or ALEC, which is a membership organization promoting free market, federalist, and limited government ideas. It is headquartered in Arlington, Virginia. Jonathan Williams founded ALEC's Center for State Fiscal Reform in 2011 and was previously a staff economist at the Tax Foundation Research Organization. He will be a keynote speaker at the West Michigan Policy Forum's 2026 luncheon, where he will be discussing his time co-authoring the Rich States, Poor States Index on State Economic Competitiveness. The luncheon takes place the same day this episode is being released, Monday, May 11th. Here's my interview with Jonathan Williams of ALEC right now. Jonathan Williams, welcome to the MIRS Monday podcast. How are you today?
Well, doing great. It's great to talk to you and talk about the issues in my home state there in Michigan.
One thing I would love to ask you, before your American Legislative Exchange Council journey, what was growing up in Saginaw County? What was your original dream job?
Other than wanting to be a Detroit Tiger, right? I mean, as all of us do growing up that are baseball fans, I got involved in different economic related issues. Early on, I was an economics and finance major at Northwood, but I was kind of the stereotypical Midwesterner growing up in the '80s in Michigan, and a huge fan of Alan Trammell, Lou Whitaker, Cecil Fielder, and I wanted to be a baseball guy, and that didn't work out for me. But I ended up finding something else that I really love to do, and thankfully, it brings me back to Michigan often to work with our great ALEC delegation in Lansing, led by Speaker Matt Hall. But it's a great opportunity to come back and work on issues that are really key to all Michiganders in the future of the state.
I often joke that when I first started at the journalism program at Central Michigan University, I wanted to interview bands. I wanted to interview musicians. I wanted to be like a music critic. I wanted to be a bit of a pop culture type writer. And now here I am 6 years at MIRS, and I love writing about tax policy. I'm like, let me do a finance story. Let me write about bankruptcy. So fascinating how our lives have changed to what we initially dreamed as kiddos.
Well, that's right, and I'm glad that you do enjoy working on these substantive issues, because one of my biggest critiques, being a practical Michigander and Midwesterner coming out to DC and being here for over 20 years now, is DC is just so consumed in the politics and the pageantry around politics and the got you kind of back and forth, the cable news circuit. But what I do love about working at the state level, and I love about the Midwest, especially in the state capitals, is we're common sense, right? I mean, we want to get to the bottom of problems and solve them for the best outcomes of our people, and we want to dig into the issues, just like you do with the tax policy. I mean, that's a rare thing in DC because it's so hyper partisan and political out here. But that's something I very much still appreciate about the Midwest.
Well, let's dive right into it. Last September, and this is just one report I wanted to note. The Michigan Future Inc., which is a think tank based in Ann Arbor, it reported that of all Michigan payroll jobs, 62% were low income. So, from your experience and expertise, why is Michigan struggling to offer an inventory of jobs with attractive wages?
People are competing for jobs all across the country. I mean, this idea of our Rich States, Poor States report was to give policymakers, journalists like yourself, and the concerned citizens around the country a way to measure their state and how competitive they are for job creation, for taxpayers, for families that want to raise their kids somewhere, for people who want to retire somewhere. And giving states the opportunity to measure and benchmark themselves is a really important thing. I mean, the great management guru Peter Drucker, he always had the line of, the things that you measure are things that you're going to improve upon. And so our basic benchmark for ALEC and our Rich States, Poor States report of economic measurement is really key. When you look at what's going on across the country, states are competing directly, whether they like it or not, for the jobs of today and the jobs of tomorrow, and the workforce of today and the workforce of tomorrow, and the families and the retirees and the things that make communities and states great. And that is a one of many concerning signs for Michigan. I'd go into the details of it if we want there, but that I think the bottom line is that Michigan needs to get better and improve, and they need to look at things like our report that shows Michigan was the state that unfortunately fell the most in terms of economic outlook recently, and you start asking the questions of why that's the case. But when you think about it in terms of why on the back end of it, when it comes to job opportunities and the job wage level that are talked about in that report and others. Also think about the front end of it, which is what are the incentives that businesses, I don't mean handouts and government grants or anything like that. I mean, what are the market incentives for an employer to create a high wage job in Michigan versus the other 49 states? Because Michigan is in direct competition with Indiana, with Ohio, but with all states all across the country. And I think we have to ask ourselves from like a supply side, economic side of this is, why would an employer create a job in Michigan versus the other 49 states? Not to say that some don't and some won't, but I think Michigan policymakers are analyzing data like this and analyzing our economic outlook data need to be asking those questions every single day.
Well, I know. So, your report, the 2026 Rich States, Poor States report from ALEC. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. Utah is seen as the consistently top ranked for policy, and North Carolina is high economic competitiveness, correct?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, Utah's an incredible success story. We could have an entire conversation on Utah that they've been number one for all 19 editions of our report. North Carolina is a different story, but it's an important one in that North Carolina back 15 years ago would have been middle of the pack. I think they ranked 26th 15 years ago, and now here they are in the top five generally every single year after some of the big turnaround that they have seen. And a lot of that had to do with these incentives that for employers to create good paying jobs in North Carolina. The best incentives, of course, are the broad based incentives of keeping the cost of hiring somebody in North Carolina or any state lower than it is in states across the country while providing high wage jobs for those individuals. And that's a key element of North Carolina's success. They became the state that has been on the forefront of providing tax relief. So you get that after tax income higher in North Carolina. Also, North Carolina is a state that many people don't know this, but since you write about tax policy and enjoy it, you probably do. North Carolina, by the end of this decade, will have zero business income tax. They will be able to go around the country with their economic development folks and not say, we need to have a handout to one business versus another, but come to North Carolina because we don't have a business income tax. And that price to create a job in North Carolina is lower for the employer so they can pay their employees more. And so I think that's a great free market success story when it comes to a turnaround state.
Could you summarize to me again how that works? How do you keep the cost of creating a job low for that business? And as a result, it's a high paying job. How does that work? Tell me what's in the secret sauce there.
Yeah, I mean, it's essentially what elements do governments add to the cost of employing someone, right? Whether that is a minimum wage requirement in some cases, whether that is a regulatory requirement that raises the cost but doesn't actually have the wage passed along sometimes to the employee. The case of corporate taxes is a great one, and that the vast majority of great work that's been done out there. Minnesota Department of Taxation puts on a great analysis of where corporate taxes fall. There's a lot of argument and discussion around who pays business taxes. Consumers pay some of it, shareholders in a company pay some of it, but the large majority of business income taxes based on this ongoing work in the Minnesota Department of Finance and Revenue there show that it is a cost on labor. So it's something that individuals don't get in terms of wages, and it's also something that the employer doesn't get because they're paying it in terms of government costs. So, I mean, when you look at what is that factor that inhibits high wage jobs, but also is a drag on employers, it's the government involvement in the terms of tax burden and regulatory burden.
What are the realities of income tax eliminations, whether it be immediate or gradual, that residents should be thinking about when they're promised them on the campaign trail this election cycle?
It's a great goal. I'm a huge fan of states trying to get away from taxing income on individuals and on businesses. We talked about the North Carolina example of them being one of they are the fastest growing state in America, by the way, this last year based on the in-migration from US Census data that we have and huge amounts of new business investment there. But as states across the country are, I think, rightly looking at ways to reduce the cost of hiring in their state, reduce the cost of working and living and investing in their state and raising a family in their state, the personal income tax is a great way to start. The other element of that is, one of the things that's often forgotten. You have the progressive critique of that from a Bernie Sanders type that would say, well, this is just for millionaires and billionaires. And they forget about the fact that in Michigan and other states, usually over 99% of all small businesses pay on the individual side of the income tax, not on the business side. And who are the new net job creators across the country? It's small business, and it's the small business that anchor main streets across the country and across Michigan. And so that's a really important element in terms of job creation in the future of a state is reducing or eliminating the price of creating a job or working in a state is a huge element. And that's why we're seeing just this last year, we saw Oklahoma and Mississippi vote to phase out their personal income tax. We saw South Carolina just vote on it. We have Kentucky that's already been in place to phase out their personal income tax now for a number of years based on triggers and reducing rates. But I think you think about the broader implication of how do they do it. And that is, I think, what most people need to understand is that the key to the success of Texas, Florida, and so many of the states like Tennessee that are booming without a personal income tax, it's not that they go and just rearrange the deck chairs and say, we're going to eliminate income tax or we're going to tax you a whole lot more in other areas. It's the states without an income tax generally spend about 50% less per person than the states with income taxes in a given year. And so the key to their success is back to this kind of public finance economics 101 is you balance spending decisions and priorities with the available revenue that you have, and they keep that generally more frugal when it comes to how government goes about spending its dollars. That is a thing that sometimes gets lost in the debate. It's a great thing to be talking about. It's a great way to help turn Michigan and other states around to reduce and eliminate income taxes if you can do it. But the way to do that is you have to keep a really good handle on the growth of spending and keep spending in check.
I would love to give your thoughts on this. One thing we are witnessing some states doing right now, and it is now being proposed by the Democratic caucus in the Michigan State Senate, is withdrawing money from state government's emergency reserve funds or rainy day funds to address new expenses projected from federal Medicaid and food assistance reform. Senate Dems here in Michigan are specifically asking for a $350 million withdrawal, and the governor has asked for a $400 million withdrawal. I would just love to know, what is your opinion of the emergency reserves withdrawals that we're seeing nationally at this point in time?
Well, I mean, I'm maybe a little bit old school when it comes to government finance and taxes and spending need to be two sides of the same fiscal coin. That's I think good public finance, and you have to balance a budget. That's something in Washington D.C. that struggled with mightily in an era now of nearly $40 trillion of national debt, but 49 out of the 50 states have balanced budget requirements of some type. And so, getting back to the practicality of it, I think is really important. I tend to think that emergency withdrawals from these type of funds, and I'm not speaking specifically at Michigan, but broadly, should be reserved for huge emergencies, right? When you have an economic downturn that's you can't forecast, certainly a pandemic or things like that, that you do have legitimate reasons to draw into those funds. I think when it comes to federal changes, when it comes to SNAP and Medicaid and other pieces, this is why voters elect to individuals to serve in the legislature or serve as governor is to go back and balance a budget and say, hey, maybe we can't spend everything we want to on this side of the equation, so then we can backfill some of these changes. I personally don't think it raises to the level of an emergency like a pandemic or a huge economic broad downturn. That thank goodness we haven't had one recently when it comes to a broad recession. Maybe we'll see what happens on that. We're due for one at some point here again, but when you look at what happened during the financial crisis or any broad government recession, those are the times that I think it's really incumbent on legislators to look at emergency reserve funds.
So, some groups often talk, especially in Michigan, about how education funding seems to come from antiquated sources or a sales tax that can only bleed so much into schools. Some say that lawmakers spend money on local pet projects that should have gone to schools. Some groups have asked to assess additional taxes on higher income levels, and others argue that a chunk of K through 12 dollars have been wrongly lost to higher education. What do you see as some of the smartest ways that states are tweaking their education funding, especially in this era of Massachusetts and Mississippi making education funding plans that are long term and gradual in nature?
Right. Yeah, it's a great question. A couple of things is, when you look at one big issue that is a bipartisan issue that I think I've heard, Democrats and Republicans talk about the need to address is, how is it that we are spending more and more and more on K-12 education across the country and we're not seeing the results, commensurate with that. And so, one of the complaints I've heard on a bipartisan basis is why aren't more of these dollars going to the classroom? Why are so many of the dollars going to non-classroom activities, whether it's administration? You have big debates around how much should be spent on, football stadiums and things like that when it comes to high school football versus, why aren't more of the dollars that are being spent as they continue to increase across the country and we get worse results? Now, why can't we prioritize those to real classroom needs and to teachers and to the children in the classroom? That's something that I think broadly as a country we need to address. The other thing that I think we see states doing, and this was somewhat as a result, I think, of parents spending more time with their children during the pandemic, was the idea. Saw it here in Virginia, you saw it in states all across the country, of thinking about how do we reimagine delivering the custom and quality education that is needed for families. And the customization of that has been something that's really picked up across the country, whether it's West Virginia with the Hope Scholarship Plan, and now nearly 20 states adopting universal education choice type programs to allow some of the funds coming from the state level, not taken away from district funding generally, but allowing that to be used for schools of choice for parents, whether that is private education, charter, homeschool, or ways to improve public education as well. I think there's really a revolution happening in education around the country, and much of that is about how do you customize the individual experience for the student better. Sometimes you see the real more kind of new element of this is with micro schooling, right? You have these smaller programs and you have them customized around interest levels and around needs for families. And I think that's been very good. I mean, raising kids in this environment is difficult, especially when you have two working parents in many cases, and they're looking for ways to make those kind of custom opportunities more affordable. And we're seeing states do that in many cases across the country.
But in Michigan, then you get into the argument that public resources should not go toward private education. How do you navigate that argument against this type of scholarship program?
Well, I mean, I think it's a little bit of a straw man argument in the fact that, in many of these cases, these are dollars that go to not directly to private institutions, they go to the individual. So they're public dollars that go to the individual families, and then they decide to make the best choices for their kids. Because at the end of the day, I think that's the heart of it for so many of the policymakers that have moved in this direction in other states is how do we empower parents to be more involved in their kids' education broadly, like they were forced to be during the pandemic. How do we engender more of that involvement in both parents being involved with their kids' education? And how do we give them more options? And so, this is, I think, something that is really important going forward because when you look at the outcomes, I think we're going to see a huge uptick in achievement and outcomes. We're already starting to see that in some of the states like Florida and Arizona that have been first adopters when it comes to more of these schools of choice programs.
Which do you think is going to have the most negative impact on job availability? Robotics or artificial intelligence? Which one should we be most intimidated by as a society?
Both could pose, some serious, challenges. And especially, as we think about, reshaping the way that education is done in this country, it's a great example that there may be fields, here in 10 or 20 years that will not exist. I mean, will there be Uber drivers, in 10 years? I don't know because you go out west, and I was just out in Nevada, and I think it's like a quarter of the Ubers around Las Vegas now are autonomous vehicles, right? And so we have to think, longer term about what are the skills and the jobs needed for the future, and making sure that we're doing a customized approach to education in this country instead of what we have been doing with more of a one size fits all that clearly is not working. And so whether it's trades and more getting to the jobs that needed for construction, the data center boom, these are all really important questions for policymakers right now.
So, what do you think could be some solutions? And what do you think is the middle ground, right? When it comes to wanting to explore and promote technology advancements while also wanting to protect jobs, but in a healthy way from your perspective?
Well, I mean, I think that, one, I think the base of what we need to be doing, and making sure that people are not overly afraid of some of this new technology. And there's some, elements that, this is right out of sci-fi, right? From the past, some of the things that are now being done. I mean, wearing, glasses that decode foreign languages for you, and, flash English in front of you when you're traveling internationally. I mean, there are things that are only, were imaginations, 10 or 20 years ago only, and are now realities. And so, there's lots of newness around it. I mean, the bottom line is, though, I think that there is zero margin for error. I mean, America needs to win this race for AI. There's zero margin for error. We cannot allow adversaries around the world to win this race and to control, AI, and to control data. I mean, we need our American data to be stored here in America versus countries that may be adversarial. So I think the bottom line is, whether people like where we're going or not right now, we have zero margin for error. We cannot lose this race around AI. And so, from our perspective, I mean, the middle ground is, let's have a light touch regulatory approach, not no regulations, but let's be cognizant around the fact that, this is a industry that's, in its infancy, in a lot of cases, and making sure that governments don't get out in front and strangle it before it gets started here in the United States, and we can actually show American dominance when it comes to the race for AI globally.
I can't help, Jonathan, but feel nostalgic for my CMU days where you're running behind on writing an essay. You have to drink that energy drink, have to drink that cup of black coffee, and just punch out that 500, 600, maybe even 1,000 word essay within an hour. No AI to help you.
It is a new world, I'm sure, for college students and for professors grading, right? To say, hey, what is driven by AI? What's allowable under plagiarism standards these days? I mean, that's something that I don't envy any of the professors, right?
So, another thing that I would love to ask you, I mean, do you think we're approaching a crisis mode with rising fuel costs, especially with major oil executives right now warning that the full impact of today's market disruptions is still to be reached? What do you see as the safest methods for state governments to explore relief when it comes to high gas costs?
Well, I just filled up this morning, and here in Northern Virginia, it was 4.30 a gallon. We haven't seen that in a few years. I mean, we did see that during the pandemic era as well. I think there are massive costs here for people across the board. I think any forecaster or economist that tells you what's going to happen next and how long this is going to last is not telling you the truth. Obviously, this is something that, depending on the hour, could change very quickly. It's very possible you see a scenario by the summer or the fall that things are resolved and gas is back down to $3 a gallon, or maybe even less than that is the national average going into this conflict. And so, it is too early to tell, right? If this is going to be a long-term, drag. It's certainly a drag on people's incomes right now, and disposable incomes, with more going to gas prices. And, so one thing that states can do, and one thing that I think gets lost in this discussion a lot is, when I was growing up in Michigan, there's always the fear that something like this would happen in the Middle East and gasoline would become, $10 a gallon or something just completely unattainable. The reason that it's not at this point is because we had the fracking, revolution in the United States, and we became energy independent, and we continue to see strides in that direction. And so the way that states, I think, can help as much as they can outside of short-term relief. You see some governors pause and suspend the gas taxes, for instance. You saw that with Indiana with Governor Braun here just in the last week or so. But continuing to look for American energy independence opportunities, and that's something that I know the Trump administration's pursuing, and whether that is on the oil and gas production side or just on the electricity grid, back to where we started a little while ago on data centers, with the advancement of nuclear in this country to ensure that we're not overly dependent on these risky sources of energy going forward, that we've made huge strides as a country in recent years, and we need to continue that, and states need to do what they can to assist in this national effort.
Jonathan, I had such a fantastic time talking to you. Everybody, that is Jonathan Williams. He is the president and chief economist for the American Legislative Exchange Council, or ALEC, and he is speaking with us ahead of being a featured speaker at the West Michigan Policy Forum's 2026 luncheon, which is hosted in partnership with the Freedom Series. Jonathan Williams, thank you so much. Is there anything else that you want to add before we say farewell?
Well, it's been great to join you and talk Michigan issues. I could do it any day of the week. I love it. I'd say the one thing that we need to do is we cannot let Ohio beat Michigan, and it's this is going to be the theme of my talk over at West Michigan Policy Forum. Is now Michigan is falling behind Ohio for the first time in our 19 years of our Rich States Poor States report and economic outlook. We wouldn't tolerate that when it comes to football for very long, and we shouldn't tolerate it when it comes to the economy. So thinking about ways to turn Michigan around, I think it's going to be just so important going forward. We've done it before, right? Coming out of the single state recession years when I was forced out of Michigan with no job opportunities when I graduated in 2005. So we could absolutely do it again. I'm an eternal optimist. And I think if we have the leaders thinking through what will it take to make Michigan more competitive again, we will get there.
I actually, one of my really good nearest and dearest friends lives in Cleveland. She moved there from Southfield last summer. I do plan on visiting her soon, especially now that the weather's getting warmer for us Midwestern states. Is there anything that I should have my eye on? Any questions I should have when I go to that local coffee shop in Cleveland?
Well, it's Ohio is a state that is finally turned it around when it comes to in-migration. So I'd be curious to see, like, how they're taking all these other folks coming in from other states, right? Because it's a whole different set of issues, right? We have the issue of all the Michiganders, populating the west side of Florida on the Gulf Coast. Ohio's going to have a lot of other people coming in. 40 years straight, Ohio was an out-migration state. They've transitioned to being an in-migration state while they've become much more competitive on their economy and taxes. So that's a great question to see, how are they going to handle the influx of new Americans coming in and living in Ohio?
Everybody, that is Jonathan Williams, again, the chief economist and president of the American Legislative Exchange Council. Thank you so much, Jonathan. Have a great day.
You too. It's been a pleasure.